We tend to think of a product hitting the market as, the finish line for safety checks. But what if something already on the shelves, maybe something we have at home right now, suddenly turns out to be risky? Let's unpack this, because today on the Deep Dive, we're heading into the often unseen world of FDA recalls. We'll explore what these recalls really are, why they happen, and the detailed process the FDA uses to manage them and ultimately protect our health.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because getting that initial FDA, oh, okay, that stamp of approval, it feels huge, monumental even, but it's really just the beginning. It's an ongoing commitment to safety. And our sources for this deep dive, mostly official FDA documents, details for specific recalls, they give us a real look behind the curtain at this continuous oversight.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to try and demystify this whole FDA recall process for you, give you a clear, insightful understanding. We want to highlight what's crucial for staying informed without getting, bogged down in jargon. So maybe to start, what exactly is an FDA recall in simple terms?
Well, at its core, an FDA recall is basically the process where the FDA steps in to identify, examine, and then help remove products that are deemed unsafe from the market. And this covers a lot of medications we take, medical devices, even the food we eat every day. The main goal, like you said, is always safeguarding public health. It really shows how seriously they take products that pose a direct threat.
Okay. And it's not always the FDA kicking this off, right? Who usually starts a recall? Does the FDA have to be involved right from the get-go?
That's a really good question. Recalls can definitely be started by the companies themselves, voluntarily. If a company finds a defect or a safety issue, they can decide to recall it. But, and this is important, the FDA also has the power to require a recall in certain situations. For food, that power comes from FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act. For medical devices, it's under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
Ah, okay. So it's kind of a layered approach then. Companies are encouraged to act first, but the FDA has the final say if needed.
Precisely. It's a safety net. Companies have an incentive to self-police, but the FDA holds that ultimate authority to step in, especially when public health is seriously on the line. That statutory power isn't used lightly, though.
Got it. So what sort of things actually trigger a recall? What makes a company or the FDA say, okay, this needs to come off the market?
Well, there are a few main triggers. Often, it starts with the company finding a problem, maybe through their own quality checks or sometimes from customer complaints. But the FDA can also identify issues independently, like with food, if they find it's adulterated, meaning it has harmful stuff in it, or misbranded, so the label is wrong or misleading. And if that poses a serious health hazard under FSMA Section 423, they can mandate that recall.
Okay, that makes sense for food. What about for medical devices? What pushes a recall there?
For medical devices, the bar for a required recall is pretty high. We're talking regulations like 21 CFR 81010 and the FD&C Act Section 518. Basically, the FDA has to determine that if the device isn't recalled, it might cause serious health problems or even death. So, the potential for really significant harm is the key driver there.
Okay, so a potential issue pops up. Now, it sounds like the FDA puts on its detective hat, tries to figure out what's going on. What are they looking for? Can you walk us through the process step by step?
Sure. So first is initiation. Like we said, voluntary or required. If it's voluntary, the company decides to recall, and then they have to tell the local FDA office pretty quickly within 2 working days. And they need a plan. How it was distributed, lists of who got it, those are the consignee lists, and how they'll tell the public. That's all laid out in rules like 21 CFR Part 7 Subpart C.
Right, the plan. And if the FDA mandates it, if they say, you have to recall this.
If it's required, the FDA usually gives the company a chance to do it voluntarily first, sort of a do the right thing opportunity. But like we mentioned, for food under FSMA, if there's a reasonable chance of serious harm, they can just order it. Same for devices. If not recalling it could lead to severe consequences or death, the FDA can require it under those specific regulations we talked about.
Okay, so once an issue is flagged, the FDA dives deeper with an evaluation. Right. What does that involve?
Yeah, they do a really thorough assessment. They look at the company's own analysis of the hazard, sure, but also how severe the risk could be, how likely it is to happen, and which groups of people might be most affected. Interestingly, for drugs, there's a specific rule, 21 CFR 314.81B12, I believe. It says companies have to report within 3 working days if they find a defect likely to cause death or serious injury. And for devices, they scrutinize those medical device reports, MDRs, which log adverse events and problems, to really understand the situation before deciding on a recall.
And it's not just about the immediate danger, is it? They also check if the company's following the rules.
Absolutely. Compliance is key. They check for violations of the FD&C Act, like adulteration or misbranding, and also if the company's sticking to good manufacturing practices or cGMPs. Those are the baseline quality standards. For devices, there's another rule, 21 CFR 806, about reporting corrections or removals made to reduce health risks. The FDA checks that too. They even have this sort of checklist, the key elements of being recall ready, to see if the company's procedures for handling recalls are up to snuff, especially around timely decisions and clear communication.
Okay, so FDA's done its homework, assessed the risks, checked compliance. What's the next step? I assume they categorize the recall somehow.
Exactly. After all that review, they classify the recall into one of three classes. It all depends on how serious the potential risk is. Class I is the big one, the most critical. This means there's a reasonable probability that using the product or just being exposed to it will cause serious health problems or even death. Think like botulism toxin in canned food, or maybe a heart valve that's found to be defective. Really serious stuff.
Wow, okay. Class on sounds like immediate danger. What about class 2?
Class 2 is for situations where using the product might cause temporary health issues, or ones that are medically reversible. Or maybe there's only a remote chance of severe consequences. An example might be, say, a medication that's not life-saving, but it's found to be a bit under strength.
Okay, less critical, but still a health concern. And class 3?
Class 3 is used when using or being exposed to the product isn't likely to cause any negative health consequences. But the product still violates some regulation, maybe a labeling standard or a manufacturing rule. Think minor packaging defects or maybe incorrect labeling on a food product, but not in English where it matters for safety.
Got it. So class 1, 2, 3 based on risk. Once it's classified, how does the FDA make sure people actually know about it?
Public notification is huge. They publish a weekly list called the Enforcement Report. It includes all recalls, even ones that haven't been officially classified yet, listed as not yet classified. It's on the FDA website, searchable, and you can even subscribe to get email updates for specific product types you care about.
So there's a central place to check. Any other ways they get the word out, especially for the really serious ones?
Oh, definitely. For high-risk recalls, usually Class 1, and sometimes high-priority Class 2, they pull out more stops. They might issue public warnings, send out press releases, publish detailed safety communications for consumers and doctors, and sometimes, if it's urgent, they'll do this before the official classification is even finalized. Speed matters. Plus, for medical devices, there's that dedicated medical device recall database online, which gets updated as recalls are classified and completed.
Okay, so the public is notified. But does the FDA just trust that the company is handling it? How do they check if the recall is actually working?
No, they don't just trust. They actively monitor effectiveness using what they call recall effectiveness checks, or RECs. This involves things like checking the company's records, are they reaching everyone? Verifying that the people who received the product, the consignees, actually got the notice. For Class I recalls, the goal is pretty much 100% recovery or fixing of the bad product. For Class 3, maybe just spot checks are enough.
And what if it's not working? If the products are still floating around out there?
Good question. If the FDA sees a company's recall efforts aren't cutting it, maybe communication is bad. Or the product is still easy to buy. They have more tools. They can push the company to send out more notifications. They can actually seize the products themselves. Or they can take legal action under the FD&C Act. That could mean court orders for seizures, injunctions to stop distribution, holding the product administratively, and in really bad cases, even court-ordered recalls or hitting the company with civil penalties. They have ways to enforce compliance.
Sounds like a pretty robust system for making sure recalls stick. And the communication doesn't just stop after the initial announcement, right? FDA keeps people informed.
That's right, they stay involved, especially if it was a widely distributed product or poses an ongoing risk. Besides the weekly reports, there's that easy-to-use medical device recall database. They also use safety communications, Dear Doctor letters for healthcare providers, and detailed press releases for high-risk stuff. And they use the internet, media relations, partnerships with health organizations, whatever it takes to get the word out broadly, especially for urgent recalls.
This really paints a clearer picture of how the FDA works to protect us, not just before launch, but, well, all the way through a product's life. To make this really hit home, let's look at some real-world examples. You pulled a few notable recent cases for us, starting with a big medical device recall.
Yes, the first one is the Medtronic Heartwear Ventricular Assist Device, the HVAD system. That was recalled in May 2022 as a class, I recall, the issue. Welding defects in some batteries. These defects could cause the battery to just suddenly fail. And for patients relying on this device to pump their heart, well, sudden failure without a backup could be catastrophic. loss of consciousness, organ damage, even death.
Wow, that is genuinely terrifying for anyone using that kind of device.
Yeah.
What did the FDA do in that situation?
Given how severe it could be, yeah, FDA made it Class I. They issued a safety communication, really hammering home the need for patients and caregivers to always have fully charged backup batteries and a working controller handy. But eventually, with over 23,000 patients using it worldwide, and ongoing issues found through post-market tracking and those MDRs pointing to design problems, the FDA worked with Medtronic, and they decided on a permanent global market recall of the entire HVAD system. Pulled it completely.
A huge decision impacting so many vulnerable people. Okay, let's talk about another massive and still ongoing device recall. The Philips ventilators, CPAP, and BiPAP machines. This one affected millions, right?
Oh, absolutely. Millions. Starting back in June 2021, Philips recalled over 15 million devices, CPAPs, BiPAPs, ventilators used for sleep apnea, COPD, other breathing issues. The problem was the sound abatement foam inside. This polyurethane foam could break down over time, and when it did, it could release tiny toxic particles and volatile organic compounds, VOCs, that people could breathe in. Potential risks included respiratory issues, inflammation, even potentially cancer down the line. This was also a Class I recall. Very serious potential consequences.
The scale of that is just staggering. How has the FDA been involved in managing this huge ongoing recall?
Heavily involved. They issued the Class I designation, put out multiple safety communications to keep everyone updated, and required Philips to come up with solid plans to fix the foam issue. And just recently, in April 2024, because it was dragging on and still so serious, the FDA issued a consent decree with Philips. That's basically a legal agreement forcing Philips to provide remedies like replacing or repairing devices and to seriously beef up their compliance processes to prevent this kind of thing again. The impact, as you said, is massive. Millions affected worldwide, ongoing lawsuits, studies looking into the long-term health effects of that foam exposure. It's still unfolding.
These device examples really drive home how crucial that post-market vigilance is. Let's shift gears to a drug recall. Glenmark Pharmaceuticals' ranitidine tablets.
Right. This one was actually started voluntarily by Glenmark back in December 2019. They recalled all their unexpired 150 milligram and 300 milligram ranitidine tablets. Why? Testing found levels of NDMA and nitrosodimethylamine, a probable human carcinogen, that were higher than the FDA's acceptable limits.
Ranitidine, though, is Antac, right? Super common for heartburn and acid reflux. What happened after that initial recall?
Yeah, extremely common. The FDA put out widespread warnings, told patients and doctors about the risks, suggested alternatives, but the concern about NDMA wasn't just with Glenmark. It became a broader issue across manufacturers. So in 2020, the FDA actually requested that all ranitidine products, prescription and over-the-counter, be pulled from the U.S. market entirely. Huge impact, obviously, given how many people used it. And it really forced a global look at impurity testing, especially for older, widely used drugs.
A real reminder that even everyday meds need ongoing scrutiny. Okay, one more example of food recall. This one happened more recently, February 2025. The Lions Magnus nutritional shakes.
Yes. Lions Magnus voluntarily recalled lots of their nutritional shakes. The problem? Potential contamination with Listeria monocytogenes. They found it through routine surveillance, and then public health agencies traced an outbreak back to these products. And because Listeria can be so dangerous, particularly for frail or immunocompromised people, this was classified as Class I, high risk of serious illness or death.
And tragically, this one did have severe outcomes for some people.
Yes, sadly it did. The contamination led to 38 confirmed Listeria illnesses and, unfortunately, 11 deaths across 21 states. Most of those affected were elderly or people with weakened immune systems in hospitals or care facilities. After the recall, the FDA put out a public health advisory, worked closely with the CDC and local authorities on the investigation, and launched a deep dive into the company's manufacturing plants, looking at sanitation, temperature controls, the works. It was a terrible situation, and it's led to calls for even stricter testing for pathogens in these kinds of high-risk foods, especially those meant for vulnerable groups.
These examples, though tough to hear about, really show the process in action and why it matters so much. Looking at all these cases, what are the big takeaways for you, the broader implications?
Well, they really hammer home a few key things. First, getting that initial regulatory clearance. It's just step one. It's not the end of the safety story. The Medtronic and Philips recalls show how serious design or manufacturing flaws can pop up and even escalate globally after approval. The ranitidine case underlines the need for constant, rigorous testing for impurities, even in drugs we've used for ages. And Lions Magnus. Sadly, it shows that even seemingly simple nutritional products need the absolute highest safety standards, especially when vulnerable people are consuming them.
It really feels like constant vigilance and the ability to adapt are just non-negotiable.
Exactly. Diligent post-market surveillance, being transparent about risks when they emerge, having proactive quality control. These are nice to haves. They're fundamental for trust and safety. And a recall, it shouldn't be seen as just an ending, but more like a turning point, a chance to learn, improve, and strengthen public health protection. And, it's important to remember everyone has a role here. Manufacturers designing recall plans, doctors interpreting safety notices, and us as consumers staying informed and taking action. We're all part of this safety net.
This has been incredibly enlightening, really digging into the nuts and bolts of FDA recalls. To wrap things up, what practical steps can listeners take to stay informed about recalls that might affect them?
Staying informed is key, absolutely. One really good step is subscribing to the FDA's RSS feeds or their recall email alerts. You can often tailor these to get info on specific product types you use or care about. It's also smart to just get familiar with the recalls, market withdrawals, and safety alerts section on the FDA website. Know where to look. You can even glance at past recall press releases. It gives you a feel for the language used and what kind of information is important. Being proactive like that can make a real difference in catching risks early.
So, as we've explored this whole complex system behind FDA recalls, it really does make you appreciate this huge network of checks and balances designed to protect us. And yeah, hearing about a recall can be unsettling, no doubt, but it also shows the system working, right? Engaging with a problem, learning from it, and hopefully becoming stronger. It kind of makes you wonder, what other invisible safety nets are operating in our daily lives that maybe we just take for granted? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into FDA recall.
Thank you, viewers, for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your colleagues. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking that subscribe button below so you never miss out on valuable insights. I'm Brian Edmonds, signing off. See you in the next one.